All right.
Well, thank you, everyone. And thank you so much, Anthony, for being here tonight. For those of you who have not met Anthony before, he's a restaurateur. And what I really love about his story is that he exemplifies using the skills you have and applying them to this movement. And that's something that we talk a lot about here, particularly for people that weren't born into farming and ranching. Sometimes it's really hard to get oriented to the regenerative space that is growing so quickly, and we're making it up as we go along. And I think that Anthony really exemplifies that because he's taken his skills and his passion and his talents to Zero Foodprint. He's the executive director of this nonprofit, which he will explain their mission to us, but just a little bit more about his background. Um, he and his partner, Cara, had a restaurant called The Perennial in San Francisco, which when it opened, just like really created a big buzz because they tried to do everything regeneratively. Like, so all the building materials, the food, and in that work of sourcing, they realized that so much of what goes into the food wasn't happening at the table and what they were serving, but it was actually happening out in the field. But they also created, really importantly, a space for community to gather. They're incredibly generous people. When I met them, they said, "Hey, if you ever want to have an event at the Perennial, please do." And we ended up having a launch party for this little film that I made called Soil Solutions to Climate Problems that you've probably all seen. That's the one that was shown at the climate conference in Paris in 2015 that Michael Pollan narrated. But we had the kickoff party at Anthony and Cara's restaurant, The Perennial. Anthony is very modest. He's also the recipient of the 2019 Basque Culinary World Prize. This is a global prize, ladies and gentlemen. And he's also a trustee of the James Beard Foundation, but just an old friend and a wonderful thinker and doer in this movement. So, Anthony, if you wouldn't mind telling us a little bit about your path and also about Zero Foodprint and its mission, that'd be great. And then we'll open
Yeah,
it up to Q&A.
yeah, of course. So thank you for having me and for embarking on this work in each of your own ways. My path on the regenerative movement, at least, was very much informed by Diana and her work at the beginning. So I am very honored to be here and to touch base and catch up with everybody. And so maybe I'll say first, I'll kind of just run through kind of my background so you kind of get a sense of where I'm coming from. I was a line cook, kind of asked a hypothetical question, why doesn't somebody just use this kind of hole in the wall Chinese takeout restaurant to serve different food? So sort of what Diana was saying of like just using what is at hand. We started doing something that journalists later called a pop-up. That term didn't really exist before. Kara joked that it was like planning a wedding twice a week. We were doing all kinds of, shenanigans and weird stuff. And in the end, we did 139 events like that. And then eventually it turned into a permanent pop-up called Mission Chinese Food with my friend Danny Bowen as the chef. We went on to open a second location in New York. And we had $55,000 and an Amex card, which doesn't go very far in Manhattan. And miraculously, Danny mostly was, I can't take much credit for it, but Danny was able to turn that into the restaurant of the year in the New York Times in 2012. So that really fast-tracked kind of our career and sphere of influence. We were off at the chef conferences, with the like Michelin-starred chefs and all the things. And around that time, I had a daughter, and so just started to think a lot about food and climate and the solutions and, kind of why isn't the restaurant industry part of the solution? People are lining up for food from these celebrity chefs. People are paying like huge amounts of money. Why isn't anybody doing anything? So along with some friends, we started this nonprofit, Zero Foodprint. And at the beginning, it was focused on all the wrong things. And all the things actually that most of the food system is currently focused on. So it was focused on a lot of things like, reducing food waste, making better ingredient choices, kind of the usual suspects. So we were telling restaurants and businesses to do that. We worked with an organization, 3 Degrees Inc., that does life cycle assessments. And so they work with like Apple and eBay and Lyft and stuff So we had a connection there. So they were like, okay, we'll give you a discount and we'll do some restaurant life cycle assessments. It'll be interesting. In the end, we did 80 life cycle assessments of different restaurants and food service operations, ranging from like a coffee shop to Dominique Cren's, 3 Michelin star restaurant to like the corporate cafeteria at Square, et cetera. What we learned was that something like 70% of the carbon footprint, generally speaking, was from the ingredients. I mean, it shouldn't be a total surprise. We're talking about food businesses. So of course, food was most of the carbon footprint. But of course, that's like the agricultural embodied scope 3 emissions from the food, really. And so, I can say pretty clearly now something that I didn't think at the time, but in order for the food system to make real progress on climate, there needs to be a way to change farming. And so we sort of like became very, very, kind of all in on regenerative ag. And so again, that's where when we met Diana, started to learn about all these things. And I'm going to go into a screen share. I almost forgot to even start it. That touches on some of this. Give me a second here to get it started. And let me make it big too. For some reason, it's tiny. Let me know if you're seeing the screen share.
Yes.
Okay, cool. Sorry, for some reason on mine, it's not. Okay, so what we do now is something that I'm going to refer to as collective regeneration. You could also think of it as like table to farm instead of farm to table. So as Diana was saying, we were running this restaurant. Among other things, we made sourdough bread every day from kernza, the perennial grain from the Land Institute. We had a whole animal butchery program showcasing things like the beef from Stemple Creek Ranch, which was part of the UC Berkeley biogeochemistry pilots, where they were studying adaptive multi-paddock grazing plus compost application, to see if that was accelerating the carbon sequestration and, the accumulation of microbial necromass and all these things. Basically, it was a little bit ahead of its time. I mean, at the time, people didn't even really know the term regenerative agriculture. And so oftentimes we'd get excited, we'd talk to customers, kind of explain the world-saving potential of these sorts of ingredients. And then customers sometimes would be like, oh my God, that's amazing. Where do I buy this? And then the answer was like, sorry, there's no supply. Similarly, journalists would be like, okay, this sounds important. So let me get this straight. I support the restaurant, that seems good. But then how does that turn into the change in the field? And it's like, geez, I don't know how. And so we ask farmers and ranchers, usually like over a beer, this and that. Hey, I just paid my invoice for $1,000, so that helps you do the next thing, right? How does that work? And the answer, quite frankly, was like, no, dude, like I'm not driving a Maserati around. Like I'm trying to get government grants to do the next thing, this and that. But it's not like you buy the beef and then I go apply compost to the next acre, obviously. And like I think we all probably should know that, where it's like, oh, I just got my paycheck. How much of that am I using for the solar panels? Right, zero. Maybe if I choose to, then I use some of it for that or something, but it's not like a clear, transaction. And so that actually is sort of how we got started in the first place on what I just said, table to farm, trying to create a program that's going the other way, and providing resources for the transition. So in 2019, often, over Szechuan food and beers, we had a bunch of meetings with policymakers, including the economist overseeing California's cap and trade program. She's now on our board. And so the gist of the conversation, I'll way oversimplify it, is the cap and trade program has $1 billion a year for climate solutions, maybe more, maybe less, depending on the auction proceeds or whatever for pollution. That's not enough. For California to solve climate is going to take more than $1 billion per year. That doesn't even include agriculture. I'm kind of, again, oversimplifying and paraphrasing, but this is like in 2018, the Healthy Soils program in California had like $5 million a year at the time. So, there's 40 million acres. So I don't know what's that math, 12 cents per acre or something like, obviously you can't do that much with 12 cents per acre. And so it's like, we just need millions, billions of dollars, we need to grow the funding pie. It's not just about getting a slightly bigger slice of the current pie. So at the time, we were starting the program, an example would be 1% from California's restaurant industry would be like $1.3 billion per year. So right away, you can imagine like oh, geez, you could do a lot with that, of course. And so at that time too, I think if you know Diana's work and others, like there started to be like a lot of research about the total global potential. Scientists were finding like that it could be like 50%, maybe even more of the total climate solution. So not just something that we want to move forward at the pace of like a few people buying nice ingredients, but like let's change 50% of acres, something really, really big. Meanwhile, we were learning like, oh, even the whole organic movement is just 1% of acres after 50 years in the US. And so maybe we need a different approach. So that's how this program began. And if you imagine changing, millions and millions of acres, it would always happen one farm at a time, like 1 acre at a time, one practice even at a time. And so we really shifted from farm to table, the ingredients, supporting the farms, et cetera, to let's just get resources to farms to get the next practice on the next acre. A conventional farm taking that first step, the regenerative farm taking their fourth or fifth step. It's all just kind of like about resources and making progress. This is where things will get abstract for a moment. So let's imagine an entire county, for example, and let's way oversimplify their food system. So let's say it's 10 acres. I'm sorry, 10 farms, and each farm has 10 acres. So instead of like dairies, vineyards, crops, let's just make it simple. So the traditional good food movement is kind of like, okay, somehow maybe farm number one is good, however you define that, regenerative or organic or something. So grass-fed, they're good. And then, okay, let's raise awareness. It's really important. It's so nutritious and delicious. Let's hope farm number two switches someday. Again, 50 years later, the whole organic movement's 1% of acres. That switch is too slow. The whole food system is aggregated. You might have like one mill and one processing facility getting wheat from like 50 different farms. How would one of those farms make a switch? Then you need like small scale mill, the local infrastructure. You need 5 farms to switch to have enough throughput to support the small scale mill. Some investor needed to put $1 million into the mill. You need enough people to pay enough for the good wheat, or whatever to support this good food economy. Too slow. And so I think what we're saying and why we began this program is let's imagine an alternate scenario. Let's imagine there's magically just a ton of money, $1 million, $1 billion. Let's just get 3 acres on farm number 4. Let's just get 4 acres on farm number 8. Let's just start changing the land. And who cares if the like regenerative wheat is mixed in with the degenerative wheat at the processing facility? That type of approach is in other industries called mass balance. So that's prevalent in like recycling or renewable energy. You've probably used toilet paper or something that's like 40% recycled content. The copy paper at Staples, 60% recycled content or something, right? It's not all or nothing. Similarly, you have programs where like a city or a county will improve the grid in energy. So in California, the first program of that sort, those are called community choice aggregation programs. The first one came about in Marin in 2010 after about 10 years of policy work. The second one came about in Sonoma in 2014. Now California has 25 programs like that. Los Angeles has committed to 100% renewable energy, San Diego, San Jose, et cetera. And so I'll just be very clear. It is not because every single person in Los Angeles is going to have a solar panel on the roof. It's not because every single factory is putting a solar panel on the roof. It's because they used money that magically appeared somehow to improve the grid. And so if we're serious about changing agriculture and saving the world, you need that sort of mass balance approach. You need to improve the food grid. So we've been working on this program. Once you had a framework, like let's just say you could somehow use money and just magically turn it into the change in the field perfectly somehow, then you could start to get a penny per pound from farmers. There's things like checkoff programs that exist that send like 3 cents per, gallon of milk or something like that. Those are not presently used for the transition to regenerative ag, but they could be. Those same frameworks exist. You could get a penny per pound from the processor, the distributor. You could get a brand to do that. 1% for the Planet has $170 million going through it, different brands for marketing. Restaurants could do that, at retail, et cetera. The grocery store roundup, you could get $1 per trash bill. You could get philanthropy. You could start to fold in federal, state, and local grants. and just start to go very quickly on the change if it was kind of decoupled from that experience of the consumer eating it, let's say. Basically, if you were just focused on changing farming instead of changing eating. So that's what we've been working on. And then, so since then, we've began a grant program. We give grants for up to $25,000 to farmers and ranchers. And fundamentally, it's kind of like crowdfunding at this stage. So it's giving consumers what they want. It's a marketing program that has actual impact. And it's kind of following on the logic that a lot of research, like market research, shows anyway. So a lot of historical climate research is like 80% of consumers are concerned, right? Something like that. A new study that came out like 4 months ago in Nature said 69% of citizens will use 1% of their income for climate. So that's like quite different. It's like putting an actual like dollar amount and economic mechanism in place. And it was a really big study, 130,000 respondents. There's many other studies. I can send you tons of links. It's convenient for us because that's just literally what our mechanism is. So there's something like 80 business members doing that. They're sending 1% of revenue, not 1% of profit, 1% of revenue to farm projects to implement the next practice on the next acre. So it could be, 3 Michelin star restaurants, wine and spirits companies, pasta companies, etc., all the way down to Subway sandwiches with every location in Boulder. So we collect the funds from these groups, and then we deploy 95% of the funds to farmers and ranchers and technical assistance providers. Actually, I'm using an old slide. So we've now, the funding has gone to over 120 projects. We've probably awarded a little bit over $3 million, et cetera. So it's starting to add up. Here's 2 examples from restaurants, though again, it could be really from any industry. On the left is a farm to table place. So we all kind of know this type of place. They go to the farmer's market, the food's delicious, nutritious, etc., skilled chefs. So the half chicken was $36. They changed to their pricing. Now the half chicken is $36.36. So nobody is upset by that. Everything's fine. In fact, it's good marketing. It's a way for them to say like, to almost like differentiate from every other farm to table place at this point. We're supporting the farm, getting the good ingredients, and we're teaming up with farmers and ranchers to, do this good stuff, fight climate change, build healthy soil, etc. Over here on the right is Subway. To me, that is very exciting that Subway is supporting regenerative agriculture. But of course, they're not supporting it in the usual way that you would think. They're not buying regenerative ingredients. They're funding regeneration. So the user experience here is you walk in the door, it's on the menu, on the tables. We're teaming up with Colorado farmers to build healthy soil and conserve water. A 1% fee is added. Any diner may opt out. So that opt out is key. That's the way that the franchisee was able to get approval from corporate. Hey guys, you're going to make exactly the same amount of money. I'm just going to do this thing to benefit the community. I think it'll be good for marketing, whatever. The guy also was Tim Scheel, really nice guy, was concerned at the beginning, hey, my team is these high school kids, so they're not really going to be able to like talk food systems and explain this to everybody. Don't worry, let's see how it goes. So he keeps a little have a penny, take a penny thing on the counter with 2 dimes in it. If somebody wants to opt out, they grab a dime. He reports nobody has grabbed a dime, basically. If somebody has questions, the staff is basically like, oh, hold on a second, let me get a postcard. And then they hand them a postcard that explains the program, the QR code, the pictures, etc. The reason this is crucial, first of all, it gives somebody who didn't previously have a way to be part of the movement a way to be part of regeneration. But then on a bigger level, what matters is, if Subway did this at every location, that would be $160 million a year from just one company. Typically with corporate law, if Subway were to do that and collect $160 million, they would have to give $160 million to shareholders. And so what's crucial here is the opt-out, because now the customer has chosen to send the funds to the farm project. So the CFO or whoever can't touch it, it's like a tip. That type of optionality is also crucial at the policy level, because what it means is that just like in renewable energy, now a city council or board of supervisors can just pass a law or pass an ordinance. Every business is going to participate in this. So if it's a law, then it starts to become almost like a tax. You need a 2/3 vote If it's optional, every business is participating unless, at the annual business license renewal time, you opt out. Oh, and also every customer can opt out. Now that it's optional, you don't need a ballot initiative. So now literally any city or any county, Petaluma, Healdsburg, etc., maybe they're the first ones, could just pass this ordinance and set a game-changing precedent for regeneration. Petaluma previously has led the way on things like, no more gas stations in the city or whatever. So maybe they'll be the ones that do it. We'll see. I'm going to keep moving on. So that's kind of how we get money. It's crowdfunding, but it's not just charity. It's like with a scalability component that, could be world saving. So then how the money goes out is kind of guided by some of the new best available modeling. So this is a screenshot from something called the Comet Planner. State of California uses this, other states use it, the USDA uses it. So it's a collaboration between Colorado State University and the USDA. And there's a complex version called Comet Farm Tool and a simple version called Comet Planner. So Comet Farm is a little bit more complicated. It's using, maybe you would draw a polygon on a map. Here's the specific plot. Maybe you would put in, the historical crop rotations, what you're growing, this and that. You could think of that like, almost like doing your taxes. Takes a little bit of work to figure something out. Comet Planner, very simple, more like a mortgage calculator, something like that. So you're putting in a few variables. In this case, something like the practice. So you would pick from a drop-down list of 36 practices in California. You can put in a little bit of detail, the carbon nitrogen ratio of the compost, something like that. You put in the county and the cropping system. So in this case, grazed grassland. You put in the number of acres. And then the model is basically saying, if you did this compost application project on the, pasture in Sonoma, it would sequester 99 tons of carbon. So this is very, very far from perfect. So maybe one year it's 80, maybe one year it's 120. I'm not sure. So we're not using this to like sell carbon credits or do anything like that. We're using it as a decision support tool. So again, let's imagine if you magically had $1 billion and you're like, oh, okay, great, let's do tons of farm projects. Where do I start? Who gets the first grant? Who gets the second grant? How much do they get? Is the money going to the Napa vineyard to plant 1,000 linear feet of hedgerows? Is it going to the Central Valley tomato farm to plant, 100 acres of cover crops? Is it going to this dairy project? Which one? Et cetera. So basically for each project, we're working with local experts. It could be the resource conservation districts in California. There's something like 3,000 conservation districts around the US with varying levels of technical assistance capacity. It could be nonprofits like Point Blue Conservation, Mad Agriculture, groups that do technical assistance and on-farm work. PASA, I think, is doing that as well. It could be universities, so Cornell, Oregon State, the University of California Cooperative Extension, et cetera. So for each project that we do, somebody is out there working with the farm and ranch, validating, coordinating, overseeing the work. We cover their time on it. We consider that like part of the project. And then for the farmer, they're basically just requesting funds. So unlike a lot of grant programs, this is not like an essay contest. It's not about the need, et cetera. The farmer is simply outlining a scope of work. Practice number 1, let's say, compost application on 16 acres. Practice number 2, planting trees and shrubs. Practice number 3, applying mulch on 1 acre each, something like that. The farmer is requesting, I need $14,000 to do these projects. They're signing an attestation of additionality. I wasn't going to do it unless I had the funds. It's just an honor system, but it's a starting point. And so then we basically have all these requests, and then we are just kind of sorting them in order of cost effectiveness and then giving the grants out. So in this case of the first project, the total cost is $16,000, kind of blown it up here, $14,000 for the practices, $2,000 for technical assistance. The total carbon sequestration from the model on the previous page is $11.95. 16,000 divided by 11.95 is 13.39. So what it's saying is each ton of carbon coming out of the atmosphere costs, let's say, society $13. For the second project, each ton of carbon coming out of the atmosphere costs $21. So we're sorting by that. And then we're also giving bonuses for equity and circularity. So if an underserved applicant is applying, they get a 30% boost in that quantification. So far we've awarded over 30% of the funds to BIPOC farmers. We're also kind of like going out of our way to specifically reach out to, underserved farm-facing groups and get them to apply, make sure their people know that this exists. And then in terms of circularity, I'll give you a San Francisco example. So around the corner from Mission Chinese Food is an amazing coffee shop, Linnea Cafe. So they source from Strauss Creamery, a really high integrity grass-fed dairy company that many beloved in the region. Strauss has 13 producers. So when one of those 13 applies for a grant, they get a boost of 30% also in that quantification. The purpose of that is kind of to incentivize like circularity, storytelling, carbon insetting, scope 3 emissions reduction, depending on which phrase resonates with you. But the simple way to frame it now is if you go to that coffee shop, you buy your coffee, say it was $5, now it's $5.05. It's like the 5 cents is going to improve the food grid. In the case of the coffee shop, it's actually decarbonizing their own supply chain. The purpose of all this kind of systematic work isn't to say like this is the exact way everybody should deploy money. It's just to say this is one way that you could systematically deploy money and improve the food grid, so to speak. But that kind of systematization allows for government integration then. So these are a couple different screenshots from Sonoma County's climate strategy. You can see here, build up the economic capacity for carbon sequestration, create a sequester local program, implementation partners, Recology, Zero Foodprint, local businesses. So Recology is the trash company, Zero Foodprint could be an implementation partner. And we have ordinances drafted. We're always bugging people to like keep moving things forward. But our hope is, a year from now, 2 years from now, they pass an ordinance. You get $1 per trash bill. That's helping to get compost on farms and ranches. Maybe hotels, restaurants, wineries are voluntarily opting into a program. It's not everybody, it's 5% of people, 10% of businesses. They're doing it for marketing. They're part of the solution. It's the cool Sonoma program, right? I don't know. But they're participating, and then now there starts to be $1 million, $3 million, $6 million a year in Sonoma to improve the food grid, to just go to farms and ranches, the next practice on the next acre. 5 years from now, maybe the fires are really bad and they're like, geez, maybe we should go a little bit faster. I mean, yeah, we declared a climate emergency in 2018 or whatever, but I guess it's actually an emergency. Let's switch it from an opt-in to an opt-out. If you had hotels, restaurants, wineries, dollar from the trash bill, dairies or something, that would start to be like $40 million a year in Sonoma. So you could go very quickly. Some other regional examples like San Diego, 1% from restaurants would be $130 million a year. San Diego has 5,200 farms, 220,000 acres of agriculture. Could San Diego commit to 100% regenerative agriculture? I mean, of course, if they had $130 million a year. Would people pay, that extra 1% at the restaurant? Well, if they didn't, then just opt out, but we had inflation with like 20% increase in price and whatever. Like I would argue at this point in the climate crisis, people want that option. Across California and Oregon, you have programs for recycling. In Oregon, I go buy a 6-pack of beer, there's 10 cents per can for recycling. How else do you think recycling happens? If we want regeneration to happen at scale, we need a couple cents per purchase, something like that. So that's what we do in general. That's like the theory of change. And then kind of zooming all the way out to the macro level. This is a slide and some graphics from Project Drawdown, super amazing climate organization that's analyzing many different solutions and kind of like contextualizing them next to each other, but also economically. So, and like kind of in terms of plausibility. And so to me, what's most exciting about the work of Drawdown is that they have kind of like, reducing food waste, refrigerant management, renewables, mass transit, educating girls, regenerative ag, all the different things. And they've kind of analyzed like, okay, what would be the plausible adoption rate of each? How much would each one cost to implement at that rate? Okay, if we did everything, could we even still save the world? Okay, yeah, if we did everything at the plausible rate, 1 trillion tons of carbon could be reduced or removed from the current trajectory. That would lower temperatures. So it's not too late. How much would that cost? According to Drawdown, the cost is 30 trillion to do everything. Okay, wow, that's a lot of money. That's also 1% of GDP each year. So putting it a different way, if the economy went from 0.0% for climate to 1% for climate now, it would be solved. I mean, we would be on track to solve it. So to me, that's like so optimistic, like that's so easy to imagine happening, not the UN making that declaration and everybody doing it, but just me personally in a second, I could be like, okay, if that's what it takes, okay, I'm in, you know. And so that's our hope, is that that sort of like macro level doing your part can translate into the micro level doing your part, and that it's almost just like a no-brainer, you know, like we're almost just asking people to do the least they could do. Drawdown also finds that ag is basically the biggest solution. And so this graph is not the usual climate graph in that it's not showing the sources of the emissions. It's showing the opportunity from each sector. So it's saying reductions in food and ag and land, you know, so less deforestation, less food waste, you know, less fertilizer. That represents 24% of society's entire climate opportunity. Land sinks, carbon sequestration, you know, a lot of the reason we probably care about regenerative ag too, another 24%, you know, together food and ag and land, much bigger than transportation, electricity, all the different things. So overall, you know, to me, it's just like regenerative ag is maybe the biggest opportunity, a local community level no-brainer that creates like resilience, hydrology, biodiversity, you know, nutrition, prosperity. Like we got to just get going. It's way better than renewable energy. And then to do it, to actually do it would just be a 1% shift in the economy. And so that is our overall work. And then we're doing a bunch of different things in California related to SB 1383 and new laws around compost. And so, you know, glad to kind of talk nitty gritty or big picture, but I'm going to stop talking now and answer questions.
Wow.
Thank you, Anthony. Yeah, it's incredible.
Yeah.
Just so you just so clearly make the business case for this, and just like in such terms that, like you said, it's just like this opt-in, opt-out language is so critical. Yeah, so let's open up the floor to discussion and have anybody weigh in, ask questions, whatever you
So
like.
this is implemented in San Diego? Is it implemented anywhere else?
So it's not implemented anywhere. So we have ordinances drafted, but whatever your county or city, you could be the first one to implement it. And we would love to work with you on it. We've been in a lot of discussions with different city councils and boards of supervisors and trying to make that happen at the like ordinance level. So at the moment in those places, it is just, you know, 5 business owners, 10 business owners who we've begged to join the program. They've joined the program, and then they're starting to kind of join arms with us and try to make that case regionally.
So if I could get you a meeting with a member of Houston's city council, is that how that happens?
Well, probably what happens is we present this and they're vaguely interested, but they're dealing with all kinds of issues, housing, you know, this and that. And so it's not easy because we're proposing something completely new.
Yeah.
So if they were like, our goal is to transition, you know, 50% of the county's acres to regenerative agriculture, maybe whoever has that kind of goal would be like very receptive to this. But at the moment, usually it's a hard sell because that city council person isn't even trying to scale regenerative ag yet.
But Cindy, Zero Foodprint is working with restaurants right now, and there, I mean, yeah, so I'm not sure that.
Right.
Yeah.
So a chef in Houston could sign up for the program. We would collect their 1%. At the moment, we would be using that for farm projects in California, Colorado, wherever. So it would just sort of be like a general supporting regenerative ag kind of marketing. The goal would be their next thing, there's 5 chefs, or it's one restaurant group with 10 locations. As soon as there's sort of like enough kind of critical mass to justify having a regional program like in Houston, then we would just immediately start a regional program. So our internal threshold for that, though it's not a hard line, is probably like $100,000. So if one, you know, burger chain with 10 locations was like, oh, okay, we're in, we're starting a program in your region. And we just launched in the Northwest in Oregon and Washington in April. So we're in California, Colorado, Oregon, and Washington right now. But our Oregon and Washington program is very early days, so we don't have an application yet. It's just like the first few businesses and some farm projects in their region. I'm sorry, in their supply chains.
It's such a brilliant idea because it gets rid of the political problem, the economic problem. You found a way to jump all those tripping elements. I'm just blown away.
Well, thanks. I appreciate that greatly. We've made many wrong turns along the way, but I feel like this is a plausible and scalable like path forward. The flip side is imagine you're a chef or restaurateur or grocery store owner. You've just come out of COVID. In the restaurant case, you're in debt. You don't have staff. Living wage is hard to make ends meet. At the grocery store, the entire margin might be 1%. So here comes this, Chinese restaurant guy from San Francisco on your Zoom call. Hey, I've got a great idea. Why don't you raise your prices and then just give the money away? So it's both totally plausible and kind of a no-brainer, but also kind of like completely insane that
Crazy.
anybody would even do it.
Yeah. To that point, I wanted to ask a question on that, Anthony, and I wanted to thank you. I love how you're just like so laser focused on the goal, no nonsense. And also love just the structure and the research you put into it. And I could just tell you really thought this out well. And it's for me, it's really affirming to see it working out so far. So I'm an entrepreneur as well. I'm starting like a tech-enabled climate action platform. And something that we've started to run into, which I'm sure you've run into, is like asking people to pay an additional kind of tax. Like people already feel like they're overtaxed. People are like skeptical of where the money goes, all this. So I'm curious, like, how have you gotten those people over the fence and gotten them to buy into the program, as I'm sure you face some resistance.
Well, I mean, like I said, I'll pitch this to 100 people and, half of them are kind of lukewarm. Maybe 45 of them are like, oh, this is amazing, I'm in, but then never reply to emails. 3 of them maybe sign up a year later or 2 years later. And so it's not like I have the secret answer for how to do that. The thing that has been crucial for us is sort of like in the case of Subway, for example, that was because someone from Boulder County invited the guy to a call and was like, hey, this isn't just charity. We're like trying to, make a real change here. And he was like, okay, I'll give it a shot. And so I think that if you are able to somehow like create some sort of credibility that it is systems change, but that's very hard to do. Like it probably comes down to personal networks and different things. In the case of Boulder, we were able to do that because we collaborated with them to apply for a USDA grant. So then it was basically like, oh, we got the grant. So then we started working together on it. There actually is a series of grants, the compost and food waste reduction grant. So this is, I don't know how much is available, $10 million, $15 million each year that grant program is available. Only jurisdictions and school districts can apply for the grant. So a nonprofit can't just apply for it. But if you have connections in a jurisdiction or school district and you want to, present them like, hey, let's go apply for this grant. I think that program is slightly undersubscribed. So it is not impossible to get that grant.
I have a question. I was transitioning, so I had some network issues. So hopefully you haven't already said this, and you're not asking to repeat something. But I guess is there like a way to educate the public or somehow to spread this to the public, or even with the businesses? Like you talked about, just inviting the right person to the meeting who was able to see that this is not just, this is actually something that we can implement and there's change from it. But personally, I wasn't aware until I had watched some videos that were posted, and I'm a total Celtic, so but I just wonder if that would also help, because I know from the videos that I've seen outside of just this meeting, how people were really willing to, opt in and just pay the extra amount that they were doing something a good cause, contributing to a good cause, and just kind of reminds you that people want to help. It's also an opportunity to learn when something like that comes up, and you just look into it further. But is there like, what does the initiative to, I guess, maybe reach businesses and people look like?
I mean, so we languished for many years with an old website and finally kind of updated it. So I think now our website is kind of like doing a pretty good job of communicating what we do. So if you are saying like specifically, how do I communicate about Zero Foodprint, we would love to just send people to our website, on different things, and they can kind of like sort themselves into how they can engage. We could send you like, one pagers and materials to share and things like that. If you're talking about like this concept of collective regeneration, so to speak, I don't believe that kind of like exists in the world. We just, I'm popping in the chat here. We just kind of like updated a position paper that kind of like explains some of what I've verbalized with the slides on the call. And so if you're talking to like a kind of like systems thinking, whatever, game changing food person, feel free to share that document with them, and, or this recording, or, whatever they have time for and would engage with. Let me know if that answers the question.
Yeah, kind of. Yeah, I guess I was just asking, just, and I'm sure maybe if you're in this community that you would be like better exposed to it as well. But just, aside from the website, I guess like anything that might be eye-catching to people, or, through other organizations that support similar cause. But I will definitely do my part in sharing. This is really cool to hear, and I agree with Isaiah. I like the very upfront, straightforward way of explaining the information. And yeah, thank you so much.
Yeah, of course. Thanks.
Are there meetings of like the National Restaurant Association where they'd have a big meeting that you could go make a presentation to a group on that kind of scale?
So you would think, among other things, I'm on the board of the James Beard Foundation, but they actually ironically just began a whole climate campaign. But they're, at least at this early stage in the campaign, it's about the impact of climate on the restaurant industry. So it's kind of like this many days closed, this much lost revenue, this winery lost their crop, so we didn't have our Chardonnay, like the impacts on the operations, and then sort of using that to say like, hey, federal government, do something, and then having like the chefs and the restaurants write letters. And, so I'm kind of here in the background for the past few years, like, and people could just like do something, but it's, even then, it has not been easy to penetrate those types of trade groups and organizations. And so, among others, we did get the Colorado Restaurant Association to like sign an endorsement letter and like partner. And so we have that like letter, when we go to the restaurant and pitch, but it's basically still that same kind of crazy proposal of like, why don't you raise your prices and give the money away? Another example would be like, that dollar per energy bill type of thing. When that's happening, people just do it. But it would not really make sense to kind of go door to door before that program starts and ask people like, hey, I've got an idea. Why don't you give me $1 per month and I'll use it on like a community solar project? Like that would be very challenging, as you can imagine. So I think our goal is sort of to like, again, kind of beg that one leader at a time to be like, oh yeah, we could do this. And then rather than keep begging and advancing at the pace of the begging, just trying to leverage those like 10 leaders to be like, okay, now let's get a law, in your county. Okay, it's not Los Angeles, but it's still a meaningful, level of engagement. If we could pass this in your region, that would set a precedent. But again, it could be any trade group too. So the Napa wine industry, 1% would be $77 million per year. The whole industry is 45,000 acres. So that would be $1,700 per acre per year. So if you imagine you're the Napa vineyard and you're like, oh my God, the farm next to us just had a drought and lost half their crop. Everybody's going out of business. Or we could send 1% and like regenify the entire industry and have great marketing. And then we literally presented that at a Napa conference around climate and solutions with Napa winemaker who was part of our program. And we stood there on stage saying like, he was basically like, hey, I'm doing this, who's going to join me? Like, let's have 2 and then have 10 and then change the whole industry. And literally nobody said I'm in. So it just comes down to
Wow.
that one person who's going to do something. Like it's easy to talk, but when it's your own business and your own finances and your own whatever, then it's harder, right? So
Yeah, I'm wondering if there's ways, like, to me, economics is the tool. If you can show them how they make money from it, if there could be provided marketing to materials that they could then use and say, hey, we're helping do this, the eat at our restaurant because we do this great thing. We provide this great opportunity. I don't know.
yeah, I mean, so we provide marketing materials that people can
Yeah.
use, but I don't know that we have like stats to show like business has improved at these 5 Subway locations or whatever. Like I can't say with confidence that it improves your business. I can kind of say with some confidence that it doesn't hurt your business.
Anthony,
The
are you
fees are
working with?
always so small, it's like I mean, I love the restaurant that changed the prices. So the chicken was $24 and now it's what, 24, something like that. So you're talking about, pennies on the dollar. And I think that like if you can demonstrate that's what it translates into, that yeah, nobody's going to quibble over 24 cents or 11 cents or 14 cents or, and it just seems like that's
Yeah,
the
I'd be
magic
like,
because it's inconsequential.
can I give more? I mean, can I make it
That
$5?
actually is what happened at a restaurant in Boulder. This amazing chef, Daniel Asher, we met in 2019. He said, "This is fantastic. I'm in." Never did anything for 18 months, something. Then he just sent a check one day. We're like, Daniel, what happened? And he's like, oh, I just decided like, I don't know what I'm waiting for, and just did it. He didn't have any staff training. He didn't have any materials, whatever. We gave him all the stuff. And then later he was like, yeah, like my staff loves it. Customers are like, 36 cents. Like, oh, let me just, make it $2, like whatever. Like, I think enough people want it, but what you're saying is right. But I don't know how to convince everybody of that. Like we're kind of preaching to each other on this choir here on this call, but
Maybe in the bottom of their menus, there'd be like a total of how much was collected the year before and like how many tons of carbon that sequestered. I don't know, something like that. So people could see the power of the small act. The power of the small act. That's so important.
yeah,
And
so we
then
share that kind of information, but it's sort of anybody who wants their specifics we kind of just share the total of everybody. So, what the total impact is. But surprisingly, not very many of the businesses actually like market that. So maybe they should, or maybe we should like lean into that and kind of ask them to do it all, on Earth Day or something.
It's such an interesting problem because I feel like on one hand, like it's low enough where it flies under the radar where people are just like, oh, okay, it's just another like fee. I'm not going to pay attention to it. And it's like if you call too much attention to it, is that going to be the thing? They're like, oh, well, actually, I don't
Right.
want that. Yeah, I'm curious about too. Is there like I haven't come to the website, and maybe I should just do that instead of asking this question. But are there resources that are like, hey, consumer, I want to take this to my favorite restaurant to say, hey, like, will you consider participating in this program?
We've done that before. We kind of tried that, and it didn't work that well, which isn't to say it wouldn't work, but just that when we tried it, it didn't necessarily work out. I mean, part of it is like you imagine you're the operator or the waiter or something like, people are just kind of like bombarding you with weird things you should do. So I think that if there was a way to do like I remember there was something like mob, I'm spacing on the name now, carrot mob,
Carrot mob.
right, or things like that, where it's like, we're all gonna, do our thing at your place if you sign up. Like, that seems like a natural. We've also been trying to get things like a college campus to just make that a policy. If a college campus did that, they would earn a stars point. There's like a sustainability kind of scoring system, like LEED certification on colleges, overseen by this organization, ASHE, the Association for the Advancement of Sustainability in Higher Ed. And so they basically said, yeah, if any college passed a policy, like, we would give them an innovation credit, which is worth like around 1 stars point. And so, somebody's whole job at the college is to like get that point. We've been in the meeting with that person. Hey, the subway on campus at Boulder, Colorado is doing this. You want to do this? And like, still the answer is not always, to date has been no. We're like, hey, here's the student government resolution. Here's an example. If you'll like connect me with your student government, we'll write the resolution for you, for your campus so that they can request that, next meeting. Nothing.
Mm.
So we're trying to do things, but and these are all good ideas, but we just haven't like succeeded yet.
I'm sorry. Could I ask, that was the association for or of,
I'll just find the link.
because I thought it'd be the college that I just graduated, university that I just graduated in is big on sustainability and all of that, and it would be worth looking into. But I was also, thank you so much. And I like the point that Kyle made too, where for some people, depending on the location and the population, for some people, they may see that if, like you mentioned, you make a big fuss about it, then some people might be like, oh, why is my money going towards this? Because they don't maybe believe in the cause or whatnot. I was also wondering for the people who, I guess, like for the people who did join in and take the initiative and kind of took that risk or make that decision, what would be, is for the most part, is it just the right person and the right, company, or is there like something like, is there a certain motivating factor for all of them, or is it just mostly just that you just happen to get the right person?
That's such a good question. So, I think that it's weird because it basically comes down to the individual person. So like a Subway franchisee was like, finally, a way I can do something. Meanwhile, I can't tell you how many farm to table restaurants that I've pitched where you would be like, oh, of course they're going to be in. But then what sometimes the actual mindset is almost like, but I'm already good. Why do I need to do this one more thing? And so it gets back to sort of what I was saying at the beginning. Like when we were running the perennial, we were like, we're going to be good. Like we're going to do everything we can do. We're going to be so good, and then like nothing changed in the world, of course. And so I think that a lot of people are trying to be good and they don't quite understand like how that fits into potential systems change.
And it's unfortunate because I feel like obviously like a larger company or Subway franchise or whatnot committing to a cause like this says a lot more than just I don't know, it just, that sense of community, it creates a larger sense of community and larger sense of like change, and exemplifies like, again, like if they're going to do it, and then on an individual level if we're going to commit to it, it's like the target person for this, if they were to commit, and if there was like number of organizations and groups that would commit to this, would just speak such volumes. So in that way, I feel like, you were saying earlier that I guess they were like, why don't you raise the money and just like give it all away? But it really, there's something much bigger going on here than, just raising the money and helping the farmers. It's just like enlightening the people in the community and showing that like these corporate companies are willing to do something about it. And then that's such a really good example. And I think also instills like a good outlook in people who might want to like think that, corporate America is doomed or our future is doomed or whatnot. But yeah.
Well, I think that I think you're right. Basically, just that it would be good marketing. It would be a real thing that somebody did in their community, a company, and that would matter to people. There's a lot of companies that kind of do community philanthropy too, where it's like, they're supporting like the local food bank, they're supporting this and that. And so we would love to be part of that kind of suite of options for people. Like another way to think of it almost is like, I am very touched by the books by Robin Wall Kimmerer that are about, reciprocity, among other things. And so it's kind of just like, in hospitality, do you want to be that jerk that just like comes and just takes, or do you want to at least like give back a little bit? Like that ability to give back a little bit, you would think people would want that, like most of us or whatever. And so to me, that sort of like reciprocity of like, it's actually going back to the community and to the food system and all these things. Someone like Subway would be the perfect one because they used to have like a lot of nutrition focus. And you could start to imagine that it's kind of like in a nutrition play. Subway's mostly franchisee owned. So then it's not a matter of like, some CFO making decisions. It's like each franchisee just could. And so if you want to work on some sort of like community level, viral Subway campaign and just get one and then the other, and that would be very fun to do. I heard through the grapevine that there's like some franchisees in California that own like 400 locations or whatever, so it wouldn't have to be like one at a time. It could just be like, a
Yeah.
couple people.
And the cool thing is, it's not really their money. They're just collecting it. It's not costing them anything. That's amazing.
Anthony, going back to one of the numbers you cited earlier, I think it was $30 trillion, which is 1% of GDP. Was that to implement all of the drawdown components, not just agriculture?
That's
Okay.
everything. And then that number, that's like 1% of GDP per year, between now and 2050. Some other experts like John Doerr from Speed and Scale have higher estimates, because in part, I think that they're calculating also like the stranded assets from Wall Street and other things, like if, Shell and Exxon shareholders had to be made whole, something like that, it would be much more than 1%. So I'm not sure what the actual like real number is, but at least according to Drawdown, just the costs, the actual, just the cost of the solar panels, the cost of the compost, the cost of the fences for the grazing, that's 30 trillion. And then frustratingly, Drawdown has started to shift their focus a little bit. They started a Drawdown food and they're kind of downplaying regenerative ag. So Jonathan Foley on LinkedIn, I've been like debating him in the comments, but he sort of said regenerative ag's like the kind of like direct air capture. It's kind of like the icing on the cake. We just have to focus on like plant-rich diets and food waste. And it's frustrating because like their own numbers are like the technical potential of, agricultural lands is to sequester 489 billion tons of carbon, like really, really huge potential. And so I'm not sure why he's doing that. But I think they've shifted a little bit from like these kinds of like projections of what's possible to like, what can we do this month, what, etc. And so I guess I can understand that, but it seems like he's a little bit kind of like going out of his way to pick a fight.
I'm curious too, you have like such a fantastic handle on communicating about kind of the math of it. And is it mainly drawdown, or what would you recommend? I feel like I'm pretty good at telling the narrative side of things, but not so much of the analytical side of it. Is there any recommendation you would make for kind of using that knowledge better?
So I don't know, but Drawdown has this resource called Farming Our Way Out of the Climate Crisis, and then it has a lot of information. The Rodale Institute published kind of like a soil carbon white paper, version 8 or something, and then that has really, really optimistic scenarios where it's like if we cherry picked the findings from a few studies and then extrapolated that to all the relevant bioregion, like this study in this bioregion, this study in this one, if everything changed, their research was showing that that the transition to regenerative ag, etc., could sequester, or remove or reduce more than all global emissions every year. So if you're trying to tell like the most optimistic story ever, I would use that one. But there's a bunch of different, research, so it kind of just depends what story you're trying to tell. There's others from like the UNFAO and Rockefeller that are kind of like the true cost of the food system is, $3 per dollar in the US, something like that. The UN report was saying like the true cost of the food system is like $10 trillion, by not changing anything. So there's just like that kind of research. But then even in the case of Rockefeller, $3 per dollar is the true cost in terms of like environmental damage and health, harm. That's like the externalized harm, but it doesn't actually even include the opportunity cost of like the benefit of the change. Like it's just saying this is, the cost of the pollution in the river or the diabetes or whatever, but it's not even saying like how much value there is to the potential benefit of the switch. So all the numbers, like who knows what they mean?
Fair enough.
Anthony, it was clear that you've been ahead of the curve a number of times. Curious what are like some upcoming themes that you're seeing now, being that we're all kind of like eager regen people who are eager to contribute.
Well, thanks for the kind words. So the one thing that came up a minute ago, and I didn't get into it, is so with Jonathan Foley, with this debate and these things, I feel like the biggest point of contention in the whole movement is beef. The climate person who's not into regenerative might cite things like, but the cow on the grass lives longer, so there's more methane, or, it's less efficient, so you might need more land, which then means more deforestation. So then, even regenerative beef isn't good or something. And the regenerative grazer, meanwhile, might be like, oh, but it has all these benefits. It sequesters carbon, water, all the things, it's so good. And then I think the problem, well, I'll just say I was at an event and was sitting at the bar, and then Gabe Brown sat down. And so we were like talking and having beers and whatever. And then a plant forward person sat down. And so there was like the natural, eventual debate. And both parties, I believe, are like trying to shift away from the CAFO feedlot beef system, right? Both the plant forward and the regenerative grazer. And so I was kind of saying like, so guys, imagine that again, money magically appears and we just start regenerative grazing on hundreds of millions of acres, and then the cattle just still goes to the CAFO, right? So I'm not trying to say let's do that, but let's say that happened. That would be immense benefit on hundreds of millions of acres. McDonald's could send $1, a penny, 1% or whatever, that would be $130 million. You could regenerate millions and millions of acres. Would it be regenerative beef? I don't know. Not really. It still would then go to the CAFO for year 2 of the cow's life. Maybe some of it is regeneratively grazed in year 1, the rest is not. It's all mixed up in the grinder. That again is that mass balance where like, it's 10% regenerative, it's 20% regenerative, whatever label, but we could make that progress on the land even regardless of the eating side of the whole equation. And so when you're asking like what's next, I believe that every single food system leader, from the Gabe Brown to the Plant Forward to the every Rockefeller, whoever, I don't believe that they're actually focused on changing farming. I think they're almost like trying to change farming by changing eating. And that is an ineffective way to change farming, as we have learned from the case of organics, where nothing has changed. But I'm the only person who is saying any of this. So I don't know why this is not like every single, like I was talking to someone at Danone at a thing recently, and I was saying, we have to start shifting the mindset to mass balance and this thing that I'm explaining to you all. And then he basically said, and then I explained it, and then he said, oh, okay, so you mean even more segmentation? And I was like, what? No, the complete opposite, like less segmentation. It's all mixed up. And I don't even know if it landed. And so it's just kind of counterintuitive. It's against the conventional wisdom because it's not about the purity contest or whatever is kind of driving whoever to do whatever they do usually.
Love it.
Yeah, I was going to say, Anthony, that part of it is the dominant narrative. That's why the energy people have an easier time of it, is because when people think of climate change, they think of changing energy, and the land component is not front of mind. So when you're talking about changing farming, people don't think that will change climate, because that story hasn't been told well enough to understand both the threats and the opportunities. And then, you take it one step further, that you have all these co-benefits that you've mentioned, and then people they can't even, because now they have this carbon tunnel vision and they're just looking at carbon sequestration. They discount, the biodiversity that's created, and the water holding capacity, and the nutrient cycling, and all the nutritional value, and all these. And it seems like too good to be true, right? Because it's complexity, and it's systems thinking, and it's not just like, use this kind of light bulb or use this kind of energy, and very linear, which is the way we're trained. So I feel like you guys have a beautiful story to tell, and it's one that the simplicity of it is amazing, but you have to find a very skilled person to tell your story, and multiple times, so that people get away from this, like, is it the beef? Is that the problem? Or was it much more complicated than that? Because that's what happens immediately when you start talking about food. It just goes straight to, like, cows are the problem. No, cows are the answer.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. But then I think, Diana, even for the one who's converted, I'm not sure that they're using the right mechanism to solve it.
Mhm. Mhm. Interesting. Well, we wish you well, and we're big fans. We're very impressed by what you're doing, and we'll definitely, as Kyle said, next week we'll gather and sort of brainstorm. So if we have any brilliant ideas, we'll send them your way.
Awesome. And yeah, I popped in the link in the whatever chat, the like paper that we just updated that reflects a lot of what I've said. So there's a lot of links in there and stuff, kind of backing up what I'm spouting here. So feel free to look at the links, because I'm not an academic or an expert or whatever, but I feel like academics and experts and stuff should be like saying this, so that the system starts changing.
Awesome. Well, we've only got a couple minutes left here. Is there any final questions, or should we thank Anthony and wrap a little early?
So much to think about. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks for the great questions and conversation and your great work.
Yeah, thank you so much, Anthony. This was wonderful.
Cool. Cheers. Good to see you, Kyle and
Thanks.
Diana.
Yeah, thanks so
Thank you.
much. All right,
Thanks.
keep it up.
See ya.
Best.
Will
Bye.
do. See ya.
Oh, do we want to, Kyle,
It's me. All right,
do
I'm
you
gonna
want to
stop
ask
recording.
people if we want to have an extra